Welcome back, geology fans. I was born a geologist, and that as far back as I can remember, rocks and deep time history have fascinated me, which is pretty well demonstrated by the various paleontology reference books and coloring books I had even back in kindergarten. I knew my favorite deadly, gigantic, and extinct animals lived in the Mesozoic era, and that sublime T-Rex ruled in the Cretaceous period of the Mesozoic era. I saw at a young age the order of the rocks and the order of the time periods through the fossil forms they presented to me. Fortune smiled upon this formative fascination when in the 8th grade and later again as a senior in high school, I was fortunate to have that, one great teacher that really sparks every student. For me, this person was Stephen M.C., seen here teaching my nephew, Wyatt Northcutt, how to clean a gun. Always the consummate teacher until his recent passing. Mr. C said to us that if you ever wanted to catch someone impersonating a geologist, ask them the definition of a mineral, a rock, and the eras and periods of the geologic time scale. His hypothesis was that any geologist worth their weight knew at least those three things. We've done the what of minerals and rocks, and can't say that they were too hard to handle, but I'll fully admit it takes a bit more memorization to get the geologic time scale down, at least to the level that you might find useful. If Abraham Werner were only right, we would still have the primary, secondary, tertiary, and quaternary periods. But thanks to William Smith and the many others to follow, we have realized that this is much too coarse of a division of geologic time to be of any practical use. What appeared to be the primary, the time with no larger multicellular fossils, we still lump a bit coarsely as the Precambrian, and give it the long-time designator of a super-eon. This is the longest subset of the geologic time scale, and we can rank nested time sequences from these super eons to the shorter eons to the eras to periods, epochs, and then the shortest ages. So the primary basically became the Precambrian super eon, which we now can see is broken down into three major eons. The Hadean, the time of no rocks. They've all gone to hell in the Hadean eon. This is followed by a time where the rocks are present but indicate a world that is relatively anoxic at this surface. That is, free oxygen was not available in the oceans and atmosphere, making the chemistry of both quite different. But as life had definitely got going in the Archaean, and photosynthetic oxygen production was in play, the surface environment eventually gained free oxygen in the Proterozoic eon, the time of early life. The final eon, the Phanerozoic eon, or age of visible life, covers Werner's secondary, tertiary, and quaternary periods. As we see, there are eras in those eons. The Hadean has the cryptic era, which is truly the time of no earth rocks now, followed by the Basin group, Nectarian, and Imbrian, inferred from the timing of the great lava-filled craters on the moon. Life may have been present by the end of the Hadean eon, but as we pass into the Archaean eon, life is definitely present. The Archaean starts with the more organized Eo, Paleo, Meso, Neo, Archaean eras. Eo means dawn, Paleo means ancient, Meso means middle, and Neo means new. Single-celled life evolves through these eras to the end of the Archaean eon and takes us into the Proterozoic or early life eon. Here we see the Paleo, Meso, and Neo-Proterozoic eras. However, the pages of the Book of Earth are being preserved more and more to the view of geologists, and we can break the Proterozoic eras down into periods. Starting with the Paleoproterozoic, we have the Siderian, Rhaetian, Orosirian, Statherian periods. The Mesoproterozoic contains in order the Calimian, Ectasian, and Stenian periods. The Neoproterozoic era contains the Tonian, Cryogenian, and Ediacaran periods. This ends the Proterozoic eon and starts the Phanerozoic eon with the Paleozoic, Mesozoic, and Cenozoic eras, the ancient, middle, and recent life. The Phanerozoic, the visible life eon, is time of obvious fossil life, and thus we can divide it up much more specifically in time. The Paleozoic era gets divided into the Cambrian, Ordovician, Silurian, Devonian, Mississippian, Pennsylvanian, and Permian periods. In a large part of the world, it is still conventional to use the Carboniferous period instead of the more specific Mississippian and Pennsylvanian, but there is good reason to make these breaks. The boundaries between the eons and periods is mainly made by identifying major extinction events and periods from less major extinction events. In the U.S., we have enough detail in our rocks to see an extinction event in the middle of the Carboniferous that allows us to break off the Mississippian and the Pennsylvanian periods, and it is my belief that this will become recognized worldwide, and thus we stick with the U.S. break-in periods, Mississippian and Pennsylvanian, and not just the Carboniferous. The Permian period ends the Paleozoic, and thus we start the Mesozoic era, broken into the Triassic, Jurassic, and Cretaceous periods. This ends what used to be called the Secondary and begins the Tertiary, and until recently it was called the Tertiary period of the Cenozoic era. But now it has been divided into the Paleogene and Neogene periods of the Cenozoic era. And yet with all this revision of Abraham Werner's primary, secondary, tertiary, and quaternary, and despite having recently thrown out the tertiary for the Paleogene and Neogene periods, we still end all geologic time within the quaternary period. Officially, I'm recording this in the quaternary period. And every geologist worth their salt knows the geologic timescale to this basic level of supereons, eons, eras, and periods of the Phanerozoic, at least. As for the epochs and the ages, most geologists also know the epochs of the Cenozoic era, but only memorize older epochs and ages if they are specifically working in that time period. The epochs of the Cenozoic are the Paleocene, Eocene, Oligocene in the Paleogene period, the Miocene and Pliocene epochs in the Neogene period, and finally the Pleistocene and Holocene epochs in the Quaternary period. To put this time scale to memory, I highly recommend a mnemonic device, a memory device to get these names in your head in order. Please, policemen, don't shoot our children. There's a lot of these online, but I do recommend you make up your own personal saying to remember the time scale. The intimacy and creative act really makes it stick. Also, on my YouTube channel, in the Earth Science music video section, is a song by the artist Ray Troll and Russell Woodhouse, and video by yours truly that could help you.
But have the kids sing along with us this time. You guys ready?
Archaean, Proterozoic, Geologic, Cambrian explosion. Don't forget the Ordovician, Silurian, make a wish. Devonian, the age of fish. Mississippian, Pennsylvania.
Just search for Ages of Rock. So, we are living in the Holocene epoch that started about 10,000 years ago, which is in the Quaternary period. At least we did until the recent decision of the International Stratigraphic Commission finally decided to go forward with an idea that has been floated around for a number of decades. The International Stratigraphic Commission is the organization that makes all final decisions on the geologic timescale and agreed in 2015 to make the Anthropocene epoch an official new epoch coming after the Holocene. So now we are definitely living in the Anthropocene, the time period of human dominance. But the International Stratigraphic Commission has not yet agreed as to when the Holocene ends and the Anthropocene begins. At the time of this recording, this has not been made absolutely official, as a date has not been set to begin this new geologic epoch, but I suspect it may end up around the time Europeans and their associated plants, animals, bacteria, and viruses started traveling across the Atlantic Ocean. The bacteria and viruses caused disease in humans and other species, and the other invasive species began a decline in biodiversity that has continued into this current day. This brings an interesting point through. How do we mark the boundaries between periods or even eras? For the most part, the answer is extinctions mark many of the period boundaries, and mass extinctions mark most of the eras. A mass extinction is one that ends with less than half of the species that had previously existed. There have been 5 known mass extinctions in life's history, but there is a modern extinction event, which is on the brink of tipping over the 50% loss number, and thus it may make more sense in the end to call the Anthropocene a new era, not a new epoch. So, we see the geologic timescale that the history of our planet hangs upon is a human work still in progress, and besides the substitution and addition of epochs, periods, or eras, we occasionally see refining changes in these numerical dates. MA stands for mega annum and means millions of years ago, and GA is giga annum for billions of years ago. We saw how to relatively date formations with our 5 rules of relative age dating, but that will not get you these absolute age dates on this time scale. How we figure out absolute age is the subject of our next episode, here on Earth Explorations.